What's going on, man?
Hey, glad to be back on the show for another installment.
Another installment of first of all, this is the Thank God for Bitcoin podcast. My name is Jordan Bush. I'm the executive director of TGFB Media, which exists to help Christians understand and use Bitcoin for the glory of God and the good of people everywhere. Today, we are back with Bondor for episode 3 of the Against Bitcoin series, also known as the Steel Manning Christian Objections to Bitcoin series. We've gone through a few of these. If you haven't seen them, you can go find them either on our Twitter or our YouTube underneath our live streams. This is designed to just basically give the fairest shake possible to the objections, the manifold objections that Christians tend to have towards Bitcoin. So what we do, again, just for if you're new here, we present the objections. We give a biblical case, biblical backing for the case against Bitcoin. We then follow that out, and then we just try to basically play the devil's advocate or the angel's advocate or something along the God's advocate, something along those lines. Just basically try to
Yes.
question those assumptions, question the assumptions, questions the arguments, and just basically illustrate why we believe them to be wrong, even if well intentioned. So, Bondor, I'm going to let you lead off, give the intro to this episode, and then start making the case against Bitcoin.
Indeed. So, we are going to be talking about the widow's might, Bitcoin, and economic injustice and accessibility. So, broadly speaking, we're going to start again. There's 3 parts. This episode is going to be long, probably going to run long because there's a lot going on here. But
And
3
for those
parts.
who have already watched some of our hour to hour and a half long episodes, the fact that we're calling this
Yeah.
one long is we'll see how it
Yeah.
goes.
Yeah. So, but again, 3 parts. We're going to discuss what the Bible says about economic injustice, accessibility, financial systems, and all that. Then we're going to look at how Bitcoin applies to that framework from a against Bitcoin perspective. And lastly, we're going to refute those points and address where there's inconsistencies or where it might be wrong or taken the wrong way or just flat out completely false. So, to start, here we go. The biblical mandate for economic injustice and care for the vulnerable stands in apparent conflict with Bitcoin's early adopter advantages and technological barriers to entry. This examination explores how Bitcoin's structure may systematically exclude the economically vulnerable and widen wealth disparities, potentially contradicting Christian ethical imperatives for equitable economic systems that reflect God's special concern for the poor. So, this is what we're dealing with here. This is not a trivial topic at all. This is a very serious topic. God explicitly cares about the poor in very real ways. Furthermore, this topic directly has touched my life as I have, I call it homeless light, but I went for a couple stints as someone who did not have a car, did not have a place to live apart from the graciousness of friends and family that allowed me to crash on their couches from time to time. There were a handful of times when I, did not know where my next meal was coming from, did not know where I was going to be sleeping that night. And, God brought me through that entire experience. And, it was crazy. It was wonderful as being homeless could be.
Yeah.
But, it was a fantastic, just in 2020 hindsight, it was like being hungry in the moment is not fantastic.
Yeah.
Not knowing where your next meal is coming from, not fantastic. Looking back in hindsight through that process was like, whoa, okay, I'm so glad. Jesus, when Jesus says, I don't know where I'm going to be resting my head, like, whoa, that's real. Like, I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
And that's not like, we're not diminishing any of that at all. As someone who has gone through this process, like, this is real. This is not a haha. We've figured it out. Here's as Bitcoiners, like, we don't have to deal with any of that. It's like, no, this is a real thing that really affects real people's lives. So we want to take it seriously and we want to apply Christian principles and look at those things accurately.
Yep.
So
yeah, let's do it. I mean, again, this is an intuitive thing that people I hear, a lot. Like, people just assume, a lot of things about about what Bitcoin is and who it advantages and those kind of things. So yeah, I think obviously there is a Christian case for this being something that people should care about. And so again, to the extent that we hear this and to the extent that this is, a real objection, and it is, again, we're grateful for this objection. Like we're grateful that there's people who care so much about the poor, both because they, might know poor, might know poor people, might have been poor themselves, or just care about this because of God's own heart for the poor. I'm grateful that when people bring up this kind of objection. So yeah, why don't you kind of start laying out the biblical case?
Cool. So there are, obviously, there's a lot in the Bible that talks about this stuff. This is a major theme of the Bible, God's provision for the poor and how he cares about the poor. But for the sake of time, for the sake of this argument, for the sake of the whole context of everything, we're going to boil it down to 5 principles. That's number 1, God's preferential concern for the poor. Number 2, warnings against wealth accumulation. Number 3, Jubilee economics. Number 4, just economic structures. And number 5, community over individual gain. So, first principle, God's preferential concern for the poor. Throughout Scripture, God consistently demonstrates special concern for the marginalized, as Proverbs 22:22 through 23 commands, do not rob the poor because they are poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. For the Lord pleads their cause and will rob of life those who rob them. Like that is just cut to the chase. This is what God thinks about this issue. Right? Okay. Jesus himself praises the widow's small offering, the widow's mite, over the large gifts of the wealthy. Luke 21:1-4, demonstrating God's valuation of economic inclusion and contribution over concentration of wealth. So immediately this is the context, right? Here we go.
Yeah, this is just at the heart. I mean, this is at the heart of justice. This is the heart of, a lot of things, is the reality that, poverty exists, and God has a ways and means for reconciling and dealing with it. But yeah, we definitely don't want to minimize this thing. Like this is repeatedly old, new. This is God, talks about and demonstrates his care for the poor, his care for those who, find themselves in desperate situations. And he basically both provides means to care for them and also warns the poor themselves. Like there's definitely temptations that that impoverished people fall into, that can basically turn something that isn't their fault into something that that they can bear culpability for. So yeah. All right, let's keep going here. So
yeah, we got to scream through these, I guess.
Yeah.
Okay. Number 2, second principle, warning against wealth accumulation and unrighteous dealings with wealth. James 5:1-6 says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Behold, the wages of laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back by fraud, are crying out against you."
Wow.
So from this we get distribute your wealth rightly. It is evil to accumulate at the cost of ethics. Think about this if you have a mortgage, right?
Ooh, okay. We can definitely get there. I think there's a lot more. There's other examples of this that are even more obvious. Because I think the key thing here is that he's rebuking these wealthier, landowners, or these people who are employers of people who kept back the wages from them. So basically, these are people who, this is just flat theft or slowness to pay debts that they've accumulated. And so I think that this is something that, this is like a pretty obvious case. This isn't decrying wealth as such. Like it's not saying, because you are wealthy, you are categorically guilty of these things. That's not what's going on. There's clearly a context, but it is one of these things where, yeah, like, and just to think that like one day you're going to give an account for all these kind of things, all of this wealth that you have an employer have withheld from people who deserve it. So again, you could, if we describe this as we have in the past in sowing and reaping, sowing and reaping language, you basically have people who've sown labor. Okay, they agreed, they reached an agreement with you. You gave your word to them that you were going to do this thing. That if they sowed their energy and attention and time, that you would, that they would that attention would reap a certain outcome. And then you basically have betrayed them by breaking that trust in that agreement that you made. Like this is, we see right at the beginning of the scriptures that this is always the temptation and the concern is when this trust that is to form the basis for human interaction gets broken as a result of sin. So yeah, okay. Let's go on to, so that's principle 1 and 2. Let's go on to principle 3 here.
Principle 3, Jubilee economics. God's economic system in Leviticus 25 establishes the Jubilee year, where debts were forgiven and land returned to original family allocation. The Jubilee legislation is designed to prevent the accumulation of capital in the hands of a few at the expense of the community. This is, again, Israel basically comes into Canaan, and their land is divided amongst the 12 tribes. And as time goes on, the expectation is that some of them will sell their land or that they'll inherit land and like all these other different, circumstances that like, hey, somebody's going to be really good at business. They're going to be able to accumulate a lot of land because it's going to be more productive. They're going to make more money off of it. Okay. But at the end of the Jubilee year, during the Jubilee year, we need to reset everything and redistribute wealth such that all the tribes are taken care of. God's people are completely not shut out from the system that they're meant to participate in.
And this is one of these passages where just the concept of jubilees is one of these things where I just lose all tolerance. It's basically one of those things where show me you've never read the Bible or you've not thought through the brilliance of the Bible without telling me you haven't thought through it. Because this is one of these things where a year of Jubilee, it basically had allowed both short and long-term time preference action to take place, right? If you find yourself in a situation where you need something in the immediate term, you can sell your land to somebody else who's maybe a better farmer, or you can lease out your land for a certain period of time without being afraid that generations of your family are going to lose out on this inheritance that they were given by God in the form of this parcel of land that has been given to you. And so this is just this brilliant marriage and interplay of long-term generational thinking and short-term needs-based decision making. And so I think that this is such a, from the standpoint of like long-term, if we want this situation, if we want our nation to exist throughout generations and generations and generations, thinking and planning and setting up structures that will accommodate that type of both long-term desire and short-term necessity is just so brilliant. Like it's so brilliant. I don't know if there's been other societies that have taken from this or that have imitated this to another degree. Again, this certainly, go ahead.
To small degrees with debt forgiveness, like bankruptcy court is
sure.
You can intellectually trace that to an idea like this, where, hey, for this person to participate in society, their life is over unless they can get their debt expunged, right?
Yes.
And again, the debt forgiveness, the debt expunged, like that is, from a Christian perspective, that's speaking directly to the gospel. That's the gospel. Forgiveness of our debt, right? Paying the price for our debt.
Yeah. So. And just thinking about the fact that what is, paying debt is a means to an end. Like all of these things, like there's a bigger desire going on there. In the case of Israel, it was so that the people, this nation, could continue to exist on into in perpetuity. And so it wasn't just individually based, as in I have my individual rights. I want to do this thing. I want to accumulate the maximum amount of wealth. What for? I haven't thought about that, but maybe someday I'll think about it. I just want to do the blind, accumulation of wealth. That was not what was going on here. And so this is just such a brilliant thing, and something that is it's very underappreciated and under talked about, I think, in Christian circles, largely because we just don't, at least Americans, we don't do the Old Testament well. So looking forward to getting into that. Okay.
true.
Principle number 4, just economic structures.
That's right. So Micah 6:8 demands that we do justice, which extends beyond individual charity to establishing equitable systems. Augustine's taught that without justice, I love this quote, without justice, what are kingdoms but giant robberies? City of God, book 4, chapter 4. The church has historically understood justice to include accessible economic systems that do not structurally exclude the vulnerable.
Yeah, man. Like this is, we could talk about this, and this is one of the passages that comes up a lot. If you talk to any Christian Bitcoiner for longer than 5 minutes, they'll quickly bring up the scriptural priority of equal weights and measures. Where you have something, and again, this could be legal weights and measures. So this is laws that treat the poor and the rich alike. You don't show favoritism toward the poor over against the rich, or against the rich over against the poor. This is, the idea is that you have equity, people are treated equally. So that's one example of this, but then also there's certainly scriptures that talk about, silver being turned to dross, and just money, which is this other type of societal weight and measure. It's easy and it's natural in some ways, like that this happens because it's not natural in the truest sense, but it's natural in a world of sin, in a world where there's a logic
this will be
to it.
easy if we just, this will be much more easy if we can just devalue the currency, right?
Yes.
We'll be able to afford the problem. We'll be able to solve all our problems. We can just devalue the currency or print more money or whatever. But those are systemic issues that affect the whole of society in very not equal ways, right?
Yeah,
that's where you get
exactly.
the continuing effect and all the other stuff, right?
Especially when they're entered into without the I wouldn't say consent, or like without involving or letting the rest of the parties in the arrangement. No. So throughout a lot of history, you have governments and princes or whatever who would unilaterally decide to debase the currency a small amount at a time, so that people wouldn't recognize, so they could receive, so that they, as the crown or the whatever, they could, like whatever your political arrangement is, could reap the benefit of of having a larger amount of purchasing power without paying the piper on making that happen legitimately. So yeah, this is absolutely something that is important, and something that we're looking forward to seeing how does Bitcoin relate to that. All right, fifth principle: community over individual gain.
Okay, so Acts 4:32 through 35 describes the early church holding possessions in common, ensuring that there was not a needy person among them. The Westminster Larger Catechism teaches that the eighth commandment requires, quote, an endeavor by all just and lawful means to procure, preserve, and further the wealth and outward estate of others, as well as your own. That's question 141.
Yeah, man.
So
basically what this is communism, right? That's what I'm hearing. Jesus, Christians, commies.
Ultra communism.
What a bunch of commies we are. Praise the Lord. He's given us communism. No, that's not what's going on here. We can talk about that more. But again, I think that this is really important to show the level of importance in both Old and New Testament. This is not some obscure Old Testament passage that is now, a relic of a bygone era. This is the eighth commandment. This is a very big deal. If you put this in question, this is one of the big ones. To quote Trump, if Trump were going to describe this, one of the big ones, one of the best. Okay, all right. So that's kind of the biblical case. All right, let's rehash them.
Well,
go ahead.
Just 1 second for this one. I think it's worth noting one last point. It's like, for me, when I read this, the thing that comes to mind is like, what is the money there for? Right? Like if it's just for the purpose of accumulating, it's like, no, like what is that for? What's the purpose of that? Here we have an answer. The answer is provide for your community, be participating in the people that are in your life, like help them out, like be a pillar for them, like allow them to, not have face their needs, right? Like, and not like allow them to, or meet their needs where they're needed. Like participate. Like, what's the money there for? To participate, to
Yeah.
help out your community, right?
Yeah. So the idea of their money being a tool that has a telos that's created with a specific goal in mind.
Yeah.
This isn't just some randomly created thing. It actually has a goal, and so that goal can either be reached or that can be violated. And where that, if that's happening, where the tool isn't serving the goal or the purpose it was created, then we ought to reform the tool. We ought to, figure out why
like-
that is and try to fix it.
And for that reason is why this is not about communism. It's not about just
Yeah.
like destroy the tool, completely destroy the tool. It's like, no, like, oh my
Yes.
God, that's just
Yes.
horrendous thinking about it. But okay, yeah. To review, we have the 5 points, which were God's preferential concern for the poor, warning against wealth accumulation, Jubilee economics, or just economic structures, and community over individual gain.
Okay.
So now we can get into Bitcoin and how there's a perception that Bitcoin.
First of all, hold on a second.
Oh.
I mean, I think this is a pretty bulletproof case. I just sold all my Bitcoin. I just can't take it anymore. Conscience is pricked.
We haven't even addressed Bitcoin. What are you talking about?
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I guess. I mean, but it just seems like Bitcoin violates all these things. So I guess I haven't sold it yet. My finger is hovering over the sell.
Yeah,
button
hovering over the sell.
at river.com, where you can create an account at river.com/TGFP. But yeah.
Oh,
All right, here we go.
all right. Oh, excuse me. You take it off. I gotta.
Oh, got it. Something coming. Okay. So Bitcoin's violation of economic justice principles. So here we go. So again, we've established the 5 principles. Now, in what way does Bitcoin purportedly violate these 5, scripturally grounded principles?
Right. And again, we have some points. In this case, we have 3 points: early adopter advantage, technological barriers to entry, and increasing wealth concentration. So to begin with, early adopter advantage. Bitcoin's design has disproportionately rewarded early adopters, creating a new wealthy class of wealth entirely, not based on productive contribution. Again, getting back to what's the money there for? Well, what's it do? It's like, it's just monetizing. It's like, you look at Bitcoin, what does it do? It's a rock. It doesn't do anything. I mean, it has particular purposes, but it's not being, it's like Bitcoin itself is not a productive thing, right? So the argument goes. Okay, so, and instead of being productive, it's essentially just based on timing, right? You got lucky, you're in there early, so that means you get all the wealth and you get all the new economic system, blah, blah, blah. And this resembles unearned increment that shows gains divorced from social contribution, right? If you just happen to be lucky to get into Bitcoin early, what social contribution is that? Right? Are we rewarding the fact that, like, why should anyone reward the fact that somebody just timed something right? What contribution is that, right?
Yeah, it does seem super arbitrary. It seems, unjust to a degree. I can acknowledge that, at least superficially. Because this group of very technological nerds, for lack of a better term, we say this affectionately, but nerds, happen to be playing around on the internet at the right time. That makes them, worthy of generational wealth, potentially nation tier wealth at some point in the near future. That seems like not a good distribution of a system. Doesn't seem very fair.
Correct.
Okay.
So, secondly, technological barriers to entry. Bitcoin requires technological literacy, internet access, and computing resources, privileges unavailable to the global poor. As Pope Francis noted in, I'm going to pronounce this wrong, Evangelii Gaudium, paragraph 53. Gaudium. We also have to say, thou shalt not, to an economy of exclusion and inequality. Such an economy kills. And that goes directly back to the biblical case that we've already outlined, like the Proverbs verse. Like, this is not, I mean, I agree with the statement here, but anyway, continue. Such exclusion contradicts the scriptural promise that the last shall be first, Matthew 12:16. we can, in fact, expand this to a global economic divide. So it's not just this practical system of XYZ thing where early adopters, etc., but it's also a global economic divide, a high level. Bitcoin's energy requirements and technical complexity overwhelmingly favor developed nations, potentially widening the gap between global north and south. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminds us that the church is church only when it exists for others. It's from Letters and Papers from Prison, suggesting economic instruments should serve the global community, not primarily the privileged. Right?
Yeah, man. And again, this sounds really good. And this is, I mean, there's definite truth here. This is something that we do have to take seriously. We do have to, think about the fact that there are billions of people who have no access to internet, who have no access to, no access to a lot of the technology that would require them to use, that would enable them to use Bitcoin. So you're talking, we're from day one excluding with Bitcoin. Bitcoin excludes today. It excludes something in the order of, I believe, over 3 billion people. So how on earth could that be a just system? This has weight.
And that again also goes back to the early adopter thing, right? Where like, oh well, these people got in early, so what about all the other, 100 people got in early, let's say.
Yeah.
What about the entire rest of civilization?
Yeah.
They are essentially
and
not
it effectively
there, right?
it kind of it's like a continuation and a compounding of the injustice of something like the internet itself, because like you could argue, well, these people had these things first and then that allowed them to get this and this and this next, and so it can just be this compounding thing that can feel helpless and unjust.
That's right. So third, increasing concentration of ownership, mining, and control. Bitcoin has evolved from a decentralized system to one with significant wealth and operational concentration. Mining has transformed from an accessible activity anyone could perform on a personal computer to an industrial operation dominated by corporate miners and mining pools, primarily in regions with cheap, free, or subsidized electricity. Consider that, subsidized electricity.
Yep.
That means you have to have such abundance of electricity, they will pay you to consume electricity.
Yeah.
Okay. This mining centralization mirrors the alarming ownership distribution. Millions of Bitcoin are concentrated between Satoshi Nakamoto, estimated about 1 million, which has never moved, Michael Saylor's MicroStrategy. This note was written when he had 550,000. I think it's 565,000 now. And ETFs, which have about 1.1 million.
What's an ETF for those of us maybe who have IQs of 27? What is an ETF?
Yeah. An ETF is an exchange traded fund. Okay. It tracks a basket that is not managed. Okay. That's the difference between an ETF and a mutual fund. So it's just if you have an ETF for Bitcoin, that's a basket of Bitcoin. So it'll be however much Bitcoin, 100,000 Bitcoin in the basket for this ETF. It'll trade at the value of that basket.
So it's a company basically
net aggregate value.
A company that buys a bunch of Bitcoin and then sells shares that allow you to own a percentage of the Bitcoin.
and then because it's not managed, it'll like if a bunch of people buy a bunch of shares, the company will take the profits from that sale and they will go buy Bitcoin with those profits. So then they'll have more Bitcoin on their balance sheet, which will reflect the price on the exchange.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, it's just
Okay. So Satoshi has around 1 million coins. Saylor's got 550,000, 565. ETFs have around 1 million. So you're talking 2.75 million, somewhere around there. I mean, close to.
Well, I mean, we're not even close.
Yeah.
Those are individuals and individual things. But then there's also exchanges, which have an additional centralized exchanges hold approximately 2.5 million last I saw. But it also, it's a little odd because of the way that you can kind of calculate that. Like, well, we know Saylor has the majority of his,
it's not all,
the majority of where he holds it is on an exchange, Coinbase. So
there could be, there's going to be overlap.
This is included in that. Yeah. There's overlap here, but you get the idea. 2.5 million Bitcoin are held on exchange. So these are This is a very, like 2.5 million Bitcoin are held by a very small group of companies that are Bitcoin exchanges. And you can like go down the list. It's like probably no more than 25, 30 exchanges. Okay, so this concentration of both mining power and wealth creates critical vulnerability points that contradict Bitcoin's founding principles of decentralization and censorship resistance, as well as, obviously, the concentration of wealth.
Yep.
So Jonathan Edwards in The Nature of True Virtue taught that true virtue includes systems that distribute God's provisions broadly rather than narrowly, right? So here's the thing. A lot of Bitcoin is centralized. A lot of it is not broadly distributed. It is narrowly distributed.
Yeah. So, I mean, we could state this another way. Even if you are thinking to yourself, maybe you've got, a part of a Bitcoin, you've got a quarter of a Bitcoin or something. You're like, hey, I'm one of the goodies. I'm one of the good guys. I don't have a million Bitcoin. Well, yeah, you're still one of the 1% in the world who owns any Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So there's still,
Yep.
It still is a very narrow distribution across the globe. So, and yeah, shout out to Jonathan Edwards. Was not expecting to see Jonathan Edwards on a Bitcoin episode. You were not. I guarantee it, dear viewer. I guarantee you were not expecting that. Okay, conclusion.
In conclusion, it seems that Bitcoin should be rejected on these biblical grounds. Its structural benefits to early adopters, technological barriers to entry, and potential to widen wealth disparities appear fundamentally at odds with the biblical imperatives of economic justice, care for the vulnerable, and equitable distribution of resources. The economic pattern established by Bitcoin stands in opposition to the biblical vision of Jubilee economics and Christ's special concern for the least of us.
Yeah.
Or the least of these.
Yeah, least of these. And then again, this is obviously Jesus, him coming to rescue mankind is the ultimate example of this. He comes, to rescue the poor in spirit. And then you see, but even beyond that, you see the apostles there is care for the materially poor. When they have material goods, they do give it out. But you do also have the Apostle Paul when he kind of showed up. I like to think about the Apostle Paul as like the Green Ranger of the apostles. You got the initial 5 who are just like the officially chosen ones, and then all of a sudden you get this green extra one out of nowhere. He basically talks about, I believe, in the book of Galatians, and says that when he went up and compared notes with Peter and the other apostles, he basically said that the one thing that they said to me was that the one extra thing that they wanted to add in was, basically preach the gospel, but give a special attention to the poor. And Paul said that was something that I was already, convinced of and doing myself. So this is something that is from beginning of the Bible to the end of the Bible, something that God has made clear, and that is very important to him. Okay. So again, can I push the button? Can I push the sell button, Bondor? This is pretty open shut, bulletproof case, Bitcoin out.
Hold on. We're not there yet.
Give me all the fiat. Give me all the dirty fiat that I can get my hands on.
Yeah. So now we're jumping into the refutation of that argument. It seems pretty solid. And the thing is that it is solid. Everything we've said is true.
Yeah.
And we could just end the podcast there. Not really.
Yeah.
Everything we said is true, and all of the above is true. All of those complaints are accurate, and they're justified, and they're something that we as Bitcoiners need to address and need to fight against and work with, right? However, and here's the thing that makes all of this puts it all into perspective. All of those points fail to account for the context and the system at large, in particular the fiat system, and how it compares here on all of these fronts.
So what you're saying is potentially we could have a remove the beam from your own eye situation here. Like, it's real easy to have one standard for Bitcoin, which is this novel new thing. You're saying that potentially we can't just look at Bitcoin and compare that in a vacuum. We also have to compare the existing monetary system. Okay. All right. I like where you're going. I like where you're going.
The existing monetary system does not get a pass.
Okay. All right.
I think the argument in a nutshell, but here we go. So we had 3 points against Bitcoin, which were an early adopter advantage, technological barriers to entry, and ecosystems that favor centralization and control.
Mm.
So here we go. Here are the points. True, there is an early adopter advantage to Bitcoin or to the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
However, unlike fiat currency systems, where proximity to money creation via the Cantillon effect creates perpetual advantage for elites, Bitcoin's early adopter advantage diminishes over time as adoption increases. This represents a more just distribution system as time goes on, as opposed to an increasingly less just system with fiat. Again, the idea here being the Cantillon effect. If you can print money, everybody closest to the money printer benefits, and everybody furthest away is screwed. They just get the inflation on the other end. They don't get any of the money.
Power.
They just get the consequences of printing money. So again, like that is in my mind, that's the ultimate, like, no, this is a system that fundamentally is designed. Fiat is a system fundamentally designed to disenfranchise the poor and benefit the rich, to concentrate power and wealth with those who have it. Yeah. That's the nature of the Bitcoin system, or the nature of the fiat system, versus the nature of the Bitcoin system, which is there is no money printer. You cannot add more Bitcoin to the network. And the consequences of that are it can only get more distributed over time. Of course, there's going to be bumps. Somebody's a very productive person. And so they, like a Michael Saylor type, they're going to be able to accumulate an unbelievable amount of Bitcoin. That's great. But eventually they're going to pass. And they're going to pass on, their company, like you look at any company on the longest time frames, I think the companies in Japan are the oldest companies.
Yeah.
400 or 500 year companies or something. But those are so extraordinarily rare to have a company that old.
Yeah.
By and large, companies have, look at a restaurant. A restaurant's average shelf life is like 6 months or something. Most companies do not last very long.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, and this is one of these things where, you can have, you mentioned subsidization. Like this is one of these things where if you think about Elon, okay, now obviously there's things to love and there's things to hate about Elon, we'll be the first one to acknowledge. But if you think about how Elon made a lot of his wealth, like with Tesla, he's received massive subsidies from the US government, probably from other governments around the world to develop this technology. So they've given him cheap loans. They've given him, all kinds of legs up because of this good idea that he had. And then you could go down the list. I mean, there's plenty of other people who receive it. And same thing with SpaceX. Like you get tons of these kind of subsidies that help you to build this business that then allow you to again take out, because you live in a fiat system, you can take out debt based on those assets. So he's effectively, because he's brilliant, been able to spin up these giant companies with other people's money that's actually just debt created out of thin air. And then he takes takes stock or shares in the value of these companies and then takes out loans against them, and then is able to have more money to operate in his daily thing. So you have this whole situation where, I mean, that entire situation is ruled out to the overwhelming majority of people who are alive. Like they don't have, the access. You could talk about, and there's 100 different ways you could talk about the different currencies and power that Elon and other people have access to that have enabled them to do this.
And that's like just the upside, right?
Yeah.
Like that's like, at the most interior, like this is what you can get. This is what you can do. Yes. Like literally the world's richest man, right?
Yeah.
Unbelievable amounts of wealth and power concentrated in one person.
Exactly.
Now, on the other side is the other billions of people, not hundreds, not thousands, not millions, but billions of people who, one, don't have access to that. But secondly, like the whole, what was it called? What's the book called? Hidden Repression or something like that? The Michael Gladstein book.
Shout out to former TGFB speaker, Alex Gladstein.
Alex Gladstein, yeah. Indeed. So, but that whole book lays it out in very clear detail about the system on top, the United States, the IMF, the World Bank, and all of these other lending players, the way that they interact with every other nation and essentially every other human being that's not an American citizen, is designed to keep them in poverty, designed to devalue their currency, designed to steal their labor from them. Design, like, Tesla. Okay, cool. Tesla's got all these great things, but then you go down the list of, well, where do they actually get the cobalt that's needed for whatever electronics and batteries and all the rest of that stuff? And well, they strip mine it out of Africa or whatever the thing is, right?
Yeah.
And then you go look at the strip mining, and it's just like, it's slave labor, and they're getting paid $1 a day or cents a day, some unbelievable no payment. Like you're talking about the difference between these two lifestyles, the difference between these two worlds is systematic, and there's nothing to be done to make it better. This is the fiat system. This is how it is set up and how it functions.
There's a famous quote by Stafford Beer. It's called POSIWID, which stands for the purpose of a system is what it does. And so this is, I mean, if you look at the logic of the fiat monetary system, if you look at the logic of central banking, this is where it leads. Like, it sounds promising at the beginning, it's presented as if, hey, look at all the consequences, look at all the benefits that we're going to get. But at the end of the day, it's doomed to end up in this exact situation. This is how it's always happened all throughout history. This is how it, and this is not some sort of, this is just the logical conclusion of what this system does. So, it favors a small group of individuals over and against the interests of everyone else. It functionally creates like a two-tiered society where you have the God-esque figures and then just the normal, the lowly little people.
So we can probably move on to the second part of this, but I think there's an interesting point to be made here. So again, Bitcoin has early adopters, and those people are in some ways they represent the quote unquote quintillionaires who are close to the money printer, right? And that's the difference here. Again, as Bitcoin goes on, Bitcoin distributes. There's no more money printer, so the Bitcoin will naturally distribute, as opposed to centralized in the fiat system, which just centralizes and centralizes and centralizes and widens that wealth gap. Now, in terms of early adopters, the idea that because you got there first, and this is not necessarily a quintillionaire thing, because did the quintillionaires get there first? I mean, you could maybe argue that it's like, well, yeah, but you're the random tyranny of your birth, just the wherever you were born, that allowed you to be a quintillionaire, or in the global South, right? So you kind of get it, but it's not really the same thing. This is like people who got there first. That's what we want to try and focus on with this. So who are the people who got there first? Early adopters in Bitcoin. They shouldn't have the, call it, advantage that they have, because that would be unjust, etc. However, and this is the thing that applies directly to Christians, and you have to be careful with this argument, which is, more importantly, early adoption of Bitcoin mirrors biblical patterns of the first disciples who later became the apostles. Jesus's disciples gained an early adopter advantage by following him before others recognized his message. Their reward, the early adopters, they get a reward. They got to directly learn from Jesus, see miracles and healings firsthand, perform miracles themselves, witness to the nations, build the church, and ultimately suffer martyrdom for his sake. They are few of the most famous people in all of human history, both here on earth and in heaven. You want to talk about early advantage? These guys had it. This wasn't and isn't unjust, but it is the reward for their proximity to truth and willingness to take risks when others won't. Further, this is not unlike the lessons learned in parables of the wise virgins who prepared the oil lamps, the parable of the talents, and the beatitudes, promising rewards for those who rightly order their steps. If you're going to lob an early advantage criticism against Bitcoin, you have to be careful it does not also apply to the way Christ decided to reveal himself to the world and the consequences thereof.
Oh man, see, this is I love this line of argumentation. So you're basically saying you have to be careful judging this, Because if you want to rule out this line of thinking, if you want to rule out Bitcoin on this grounds, you're also ruling out the apostles. and you're objecting to Jesus choosing the disciples. You're objecting to, I mean, you could even go, I mean, yeah, there'd be no need to just start there. I mean, you can go back, you think about the nature of prophecy, like the nature of prophets. God chose certain people to be prophets, kind of just plucked one and just basically said, hey, you're going to do this. He didn't choose other people. He gave them privileged access to himself, to his covenants, to, you know, all these kind of things. Yeah, I love this line of argument. Yeah, man, there's a lot of ways you could go with this, but yeah, this is something where it's not, I mean, the nature of reality is that all of life is a gift, right? Like because if you go right back to the very beginning, what do you have that you did not receive? Like, what do we have from our life, our parents, or, you know, our lack of parent, whatever it is, anything that you have, it's received as a gift. It's received as something that you did not earn, and thus you can't object to it by saying, hey, I deserve something other than this. Like, that doesn't make any sense in a world in which we are created people, and you know, who've been given these things and trusted with these things by God.
There's also just the practicality of it, right? Like, either Jesus comes to earth as a man and disciples 12 guys, and they go on to evangelize the next 12 guys, the next 100 guys, and then those guys the church grows, and it grows through time and through history. Yeah. What's the alternative? The alternative is, well, Jesus appears to either everybody all at once and they all have to decide, or which is, you know, antithetical to being like fully human, right? Like, you have to exist in time and space. And
why is that?
That's the case.
Why else is weird at odds with being human? What's another reason? Because that might not be obvious to somebody. How is that at odds with being human?
Oh, I don't know. This is unprepared question.
That's right. All right. I'll give you one example. Okay. So the scriptures are clear that one of the things that separates humans from animals is the ability to reason. Okay. In the book of Romans chapter 1, the Apostle Paul talks about, he compares sinful people to unreasoning animals. He basically says they're not able to reason, and they just act however they feel based on their desires or based on their hungers or, you know, whatever. You see, this is differentiated by the way that God describes in response to sinful Israel. There's a number of places where Israel is, I believe they were in exile at this point, or getting ready to go into exile, and God communicates to them through one of the prophets and says, "Come, let us reason together." Right? Like, this is, so if God were just to mass appeal to everybody, okay, number one, there wouldn't be faith involved. Like, there wouldn't be, you know, there wouldn't be the same level of trust. And again, it would in a very real way violate this way that God has designed humans to operate, which is according to reason. Like, God wants people to be, you know, to be presented with arguments and to assimilate, to distinguish between truth and falsehood, and then assimilate truth into their lives. This is part of how God has designed the world to work. Now, again, you can argue with this, you can object to this, and you can say, hey, if I was God, I would have done it a different way. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't surprise us that an all-knowing, all-powerful being would do things differently and see things differently than we do, because we are, by definition, not that. And so I think that this is another big thing, is like, God, I like God's way of doing something better than your way of not doing it, you know, to borrow from another phrase.
So there's also another interesting thing worth drawing out of this, which is God didn't just reveal everything to everybody all at once. Yeah. He revealed it to 12 people. Yeah. They have to go through the process of reasoning, but that reveals something about God's character. And that's what he wants them to participate. He doesn't want to do the reasoning all himself. He wants the people to participate. He wants us to share in the good news, in the gospel, being able to share in this story, being able to share in putting something out there, changing the world. Like, he wants us to be the ones who speak. You know, if it's not us, then the rocks will speak. He wants us to speak. He doesn't want the rocks to speak, right? Yeah. It's just,
and we know this, right? We know this based on our own experience. Like, we do this with our kids, right? Theoretically, would I work in the immediate term a lot faster if I just did everything myself versus my kids helping me? If the only factor in consideration is the speed at which I can do something now, well then yes, I can do things way faster than my 4-year-old. At the same time, like my 4-year-old is going to grow into, Lord willing, a full-grown adult who is going to have, who's going to be able to help and serve and benefit both my own family and other people around the world in 100 ways. And so by investing in him and helping him to learn and to do these things today, I'm actually investing in the long term, the long term trajectory of his life and the lives of the people who he'll come in contact with. So yeah, there's a lot more going on here. This makes a lot of sense, even by comparison to known human experience. But it's not intuitive. It's one of these things where we have to challenge our intuition with our reason.
Yeah. And the same thing applies. Well, how dare your children be early adopters? Like you can take it to the absurdity of the argument. How dare your children be early adopters? Like, to your influence, like how dare they have you as a dad? Like you get into these like insane kind of like, if we're really going to accept this, as presented or with these particular airs, then we're getting to some really bizarro things, right?
Yeah. Yep. So. Agreed. Okay. So that's the first part. Okay. Now part 2 here. What's the,
okay.
So yes.
True. Yeah. True. Bitcoin does have technological barriers to entry. However, the legacy system is far worse, unbelievably worse. Okay, so first we have 4 points about how it's worse. First, the legacy banking system is far more exclusionary, denying services to billions worldwide through requirements for identification documents, minimum balances, proximity to physical branches, fees, credit histories, the list just goes on. And on top of this list, we also have this unbelievably long history. Like you probably want to start at somewhere around the colonial area when these systems started to come about. So like 400 years of banking systems essentially entrenching themselves in exclusionary barriers to entry, right? So Bitcoin being free open source technology is becoming increasingly accessible through mobile solutions and simplified interfaces. And Bitcoin is blind. It cannot discriminate against anyone's transaction. If you have access to the source code, you can do a Bitcoin transaction. If you have access to a computer, a cell phone, you can do a Bitcoin transaction. Now, there's a little bit of hoops you have to jump through there, but it's blind, like permissionless. No one can say you can't do it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you've got 1.7. This is I believe this is from the Human Rights Foundation. There are 1.7 billion people in the world who don't have access to bank accounts. And they don't have access to bank accounts. A lot of those people don't have access to the internet. Like there's still lots of people who don't have access to the internet. And then, but they do have access to something like a cell phone, right? Yeah. There's 1.1 billion of the 1.7 billion who don't have access to a bank account do have access to a cell phone and cell service. So if there was a money, theoretically, hypothetically, if there was a money that you could, send over the phone, then even like it would actually open up banking services to 1.1 out of those 1.7 billion most vulnerable people, on Earth.
Mm-hmm. So, point number 2, fiat predicated welfare systems, aka fiat technology, let's say, create dependency traps, colloquially the welfare cliff. Bitcoin can help people avoid these traps simply because it is savings. This is not to say Bitcoin gets people immediately out of the trap, but it helps them avoid it in the first place. One of the big themes about this entire discussion is this idea that you are excluded at the lowest ends of things. You are excluded from the rest of civilization. This is the next point is housing as savings, but I think it's worth discussing here as well, or like unpacking. If you are unable to make $3,000 a month, and housing is the primary vehicle across all of Americans for savings, for saving anything. If you can't make the $3,000 a month to meet a mortgage, which is based on current interest rates and a $400,000 phone, if you
Sure.
can't do that, you are excluded from using the technology of savings.
Yep.
Because all the money you have, all the money that's coming in, gets devalued. Your wages is getting devalued. You can put none of it away, essentially,
Yep.
and you are excluded from the technology of savings. And the technology of savings just itself is like baseline fundamental technology that people need to be.
Yeah.
They need to be able to trade their labor for something so that they can participate and buy like
Sure.
food with their labor, because their labor usually isn't going to get them food directly, right?
Yeah. Now again, we'll push back a little bit. Okay, we'll push back on you. So obviously there is something like gold. Okay, gold is a way for normal people to save that doesn't then require, future maintenance costs depending on how much you own. Like if you own large amounts, you're probably going to custody it somewhere in a cool place or whatever. But like gold is one way. I mean, has been a way. Look at all of our gold bug listeners just rejoicing that I'm remembering this and mentioning it. But yeah, I think that to be honest, like that is one way. That certainly is one way. There are limitations and there are drawbacks to using that. But that is one way. I'm sure there's people who are listening to this who are thinking, well, what about stock market? And again, that the clarification will be that is a different thing. Like that's different than, holding something that doesn't have a counterparty risk. Holding something that it's different than investing in a company. Those are two different concepts. So
and again, this point, like stepping back again, this point is about the welfare cliff, like the fiat technology
Yes.
of welfare. Like all of those systems can only exist because cantillionaires on the inside essentially either think it's economically advantageous for tax advantages or whatever, or they actually have a heart and they want to put the money out to the ends of the system, or out to the people the furthest from the inside. They go through the process of building this quote unquote fiat technology, which is the welfare system, where, okay, cool. This allows the transfer of money from the inside to the furthest reaches in the outside. But the consequences of that are a welfare cliff. If you get into this trap of, well, I'm going to try and make money. I'm going to try and invest in the stock market. I'm going to try and buy gold. Well, where'd you get the money to do that? Well, if you're getting any extra money, that just comes out of your welfare, right? That's the cliff. Like if you try and pursue anything that makes you any money, your welfare check decreases.
Yeah.
And so there's no incentive for you to even bother. Like, why bother with this? Right?
Yeah. 100%.
Like that's the fiat technology that's exclusionary, right?
Wow.
It's unbelievable. Yeah, you can have gold and you can have stocks or whatever, but as long as there's a fiat system that pays for this the fiat technology of a welfare system or a welfare cliff, like it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It does not matter that you have access to any of this stuff, right? Now, Bitcoin comes in and says, well, you can literally be homeless and still have Bitcoin. You can cross borders with Bitcoin in your head. Hard to do those kind of things with gold. And so there is a advantage there. It's not,
I'm just envisioning someone shoving a bar of gold into their head, or like, those people who like cut a hole in the top of their mouth and like slide a little gold bar in there. Yeah. So maybe possible, but very, very unhealthy and sanitary and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Third
point. Here we go. Housing as savings. We kind of touched on this. So housing on savings is increasingly untenable for average workers. $400,000 house at $300,000 or $3,000 a month mortgage. You are excluded from savings if you cannot make a $3,000 a month mortgage. Again, we've talked about this. So how does Bitcoin come into play here? Bitcoin provides an accessible alternative savings vehicle with no entry requirements that can appreciate in value without barriers. I mean, this is the point we're just making, right?
Yeah.
So imagine being excluded from savings technology because you do not make $3,000 a month. During the years of homelessness that I had, not years, but like a year and a half, I was making, like in terms of income, I was making like between $6,000 to $12,000 a year, right? Just enough to buy food.
Survive. Yeah. Yeah. Buy
Like
food
when I
and
can
survive.
afford food, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's no, oh yeah, I'm gonna save for a house. Yeah, that's coming up next. I'm gonna go homeless to homeowner. It's like no, there's no possible
Yeah.
like path
Yeah.
for that apart from winning
Yeah.
the lottery, right? Like it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
this is not a repeatable thing. However, with Bitcoin, like you can be stacking $1. Like instead of eating a meal, you're stacking $1, right? You're stacking
Yeah.
100 sats, 1,000 sats, right? Like this is a
Yep.
possibility with Bitcoin. Even with gold or stocks or anything, this is vanishingly small. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that you can do these days with gold and with stock market stuff, but all of those are predicated on third parties and like personal security risk. Like when you're homeless, all your stuff is on your person, right?
Yeah.
So it's very risky to hold valuable things on your person
Correct.
naturally.
Yeah.
So
People rob you. There's all kinds of dangers that, that people who don't have a place to store stuff can fall prey to. Okay. So fourth,
again, so we are in the legacy system is far worse. Fourth, Bitcoin's energy narrative is increasingly outdated as mining shifts towards renewable energy sources. This is again going on the big picture. And stranded energy that would otherwise be wasted, potentially becoming a driver for sustainable energy adoption in developing regions. So now we can look at, we're talking about just local stuff. We can now look at a broader impact on the world economy, global south kind of situations. I'm going to butcher the country here. You probably know more about this, but I'm pretty sure the country is Patagonia. It's a country that's next to Brazil. They had a massive dam. Like it's a huge dam down there.
Patagonia's in Argentina. So is it Argentina?
Okay,
yeah.
I don't think it's Argentina. It's one of the smaller ones that's next to Brazil.
Okay.
But it's basically it's global south, like hardcore global south.
Okay.
And they either Brazil paid for it or some like the IMF paid for it or something, but they built this huge dam, like way more energy than anybody in this country needs. And they basically just exported that energy to Brazil or gave it away. There's so much of it. What are we going to do with all this energy? And that was the case for years until Bitcoin mining entered the equation, where they realized that like, oh, we can just use all this excess energy to create economic value. We will get paid via Bitcoin mining. And the consequences there are that, well, now we can afford schools. We can afford like all these other systems that otherwise, like, because we could charge Brazil for the energy, but then they wouldn't pay it because there's no reason, and then it's just all lost, right? We can just, but with Bitcoin mining, we can mine the excess energy. We can create schools. We can create new economies, new inputs, right? This is an incredible advantage to anybody who has access to energy, which a lot of the global south has access to energy. I mean, strictly just from the sun, right?
Yeah.
But also from systems like this.
Here, let's see this, because I found what you were looking for, what you were talking about. Oh, of course, when I try to do this, it's not going to work. Here we go. Let's do. Of course, it's not going to work. But the country in question was Paraguay.
Paraguay, there you go.
Yep.
I was thinking Patagonia. Terrible.
Let's see. How do I find this? It should be a window. And of course, it's not going to work. Anyhow, it's Paraguay. It's one of the largest dams in South America. They're using it to mine Bitcoin with. Incredible. Love it. Okay.
Yeah.
So now. Keep going. No, you're good.
Lastly, Scripture shows that God's provision often requires human cooperation and effort. The manna required gathering, Exodus 16, and the disciples had to distribute the loaves and the fish, Matthew 14:19. Again, Jesus wants participation. Similarly, while Bitcoin requires some technological learning, its potential to protect the vulnerable from currency debasement makes this effort worthwhile. This is to be distinguished from the fiat system, which says you don't need to help the poor because your taxes pay other people too. It's hardly a Christian argument to reject something on grounds of barriers when the church itself is called to participate in removing barriers.
Yeah. Yeah. So this, yeah. Yeah, man. This is again for a lot of people. This is they're just not used to thinking about Bitcoin through these lenses, or like just thinking about it in this way. They hear things and they just repeat them, parrot them, whatever. But
Yeah.
yeah, I just think that you have to look at the existing system. You have to examine that one as well. And what you start to see is like it is not designed for normal people. It is not
Yeah.
designed, for the benefit of people. It's designed for the benefit of the people who run these systems. I mean, you could look at something like KYC laws as like an example of this, where purportedly these things are designed to, protect against funding of terrorism or funding of all these things. Well, and then we come and find out that, what's his name, J.P. Morgan, Jamie Dimon, his bank was knowingly facilitating Epstein's, banking for
Yeah.
years, like all the kinds of just known all kinds of known fraud, known all these kinds of things that are that are only possible because of the existing system. Like they're actually like ushered through because they're making so much money for these banks, that they can get away with these kind of things. They'll probably I think JP Morgan had to pay a little bit of a fine for that. But again,
just a little bit. Nobody's going to go to jail. That's fine. Yeah,
exactly.
It's
Just one of these things where it actually facilitates greater, like the largest scale theft and largest scale criminal activity. Like it's just not a realistic comparison when you actually look at the things on the ground to try to compare Bitcoin to this. It's laughable.
And it really like brings out the issues of like, oh well, like if you're gonna like bash Bitcoin, like fine, that's great, but like why bash the thing like for the exact same fundamental reason? Like why attack why attack the guy with the bow and arrow when there's like aircraft carriers that like machine guns, why call attention to the thing that you think you can win versus like as a Christian, like you're called from God to like call attention to the thing that can kill you, because that's the thing that you shouldn't be afraid of. Like there's a whole bunch of like, no, you need to be calling attention really, like if this is the thing that you care about, that this system of injustice, if you really care about injustice, you have to pay attention to the fiat system. It is the most potentially the most unjust system that exists on earth. And from it, so much other injustices come about.
Yeah. And so why does this matter? Well, because it's hypocrisy. Like it's the height of hypocrisy to try to point out the speck of a system, which is Bitcoin, when you have a giant gaping beam in your own eye, right? Like we just compared the fact that the Bitcoin system, like it would onboard, if implemented at scale, it is possible for this to happen. That like even today, if every person understood Bitcoin, you would give 1.1 billion more people access to a savings vehicle than currently exists with the existing financial system that's existed forever, that has all the tools and all the resources of every government on earth,
and does not employ it to these ends, does not care.
Yeah.
Does everything it can to literally sequester its own power and its own influence.
Well, and why don't they care? Because there's no money to be made from these poor people. Like that's the reality. It's like
apart from their labor as they slave over whatever copper mines or whatever it is, right?
Exactly. Yeah. They can express value from people's lives that way, but they can't do it because these people don't have very much money to be able to, be expressed. Yeah.
So yeah, the church is called to participate. It's called to like remove barriers. It's called to remove these impediments that prevent the poor from flourishing and getting ahead and participating.
Yep.
To do that, you're going to have to take down the fiat system. Like personally, I don't know another way to, like you have to attack the fiat system. There's no other alternative. You can't run from the fiat system. Where are you going to go? Like the moon? Like, no.
Yeah.
You have to attack the fiat system. I say it a lot. The move is to attack. You can't escape fiat. You have to attack it.
Yeah. And I mean, there's two sides of it, right? Like you do have to, you ought to, like there's a, you have a duty, like to a certain degree, to attack it, and at the same time, the thing is crumbling under its own weight. Like it actually is just
Yeah.
falling apart. You know, not so
Yeah.
much like the system itself is falling apart, not necessarily because of like the infrastructure, but just the logic and the debt and all the things that are involved, and the international relationships between countries are breaking down. You know, we have a tariff war going on. You've got actual hot wars going on in other places. And so, a lot of this, you're able to do a lot more. Well, you're able to exercise a lot of discriminatory treatment that you wouldn't do if there were other constraints, like if there weren't certain constraints
there are
in
more
place.
constraints.
Yeah. And so like Bitcoin basically puts everyone on an equal playing field. And now all of a sudden you have to treat each other more like equals than you do,
Mhm.
than you do, we're super powerful and you're weak. Like it kind of just, it creates a higher cost to acting like that. And just basically saying, I don't care what you think as a country. I'm just going to do whatever I want to do. There's much more recognizable immediate consequences where you have a neutral money, something like Bitcoin.
Okay. So sorry, because there's so many lists and
great.
sub-lists of lists.
That's great. We're good.
Last point in the refutation. Third point in the refutation. Last point in the refutation. Then we'll get to the conclusion of the refutation. True, the Bitcoin ecosystem has evolved into what appears to be a centralized industrial and commercial operation. However, this has no bearing on the fundamental nature of Bitcoin. While mining has industrialized and certain entities hold large quantities of Bitcoin, these facts misunderstand Bitcoin's governance model. Node operators, not miners, or large holders ultimately decide Bitcoin's fate. The approximately 22,000 reachable independent nodes distributed globally, that's just the reachable nodes. There's way more nodes than that. Distributed globally, enforce consensus rules, validating transactions, and can unilaterally reject any changes that violate Bitcoin's core principles, provided they can reach agreement. This is why attempts to alter the protocol, like the block size wars, have failed miserably despite support from miners and wealthy stakeholders. The big issue here is that despite this visual or surface level take that says Bitcoin is crazy centralized with control or not control, but with miners and wealth accumulation, the actual control continues to decentralize. In fact, if you look at reachable nodes from a few years ago, maybe 5-7 years ago, something like that, it was around 10,000. There were 10,000 reachable nodes.
Yep.
Now there's 22,000. So the network itself is becoming more decentralized, more distributed. And this is the real power of the network. This it's a slap in the face to the idea that Bitcoin is quote unquote centralized or quote unquote controlled.
This is such an, this question and point comes up all the time. I talk with people about this all the time. There's people who look at Bitcoin and they say, when are you going to be able to pay with Bitcoin for my groceries? Or when are we going to be able to pay for Bitcoin with all these things? Like I can't pay with Bitcoin anywhere. It's not really valuable because I can't pay anywhere with it. And it's like, it confuses the fact that these things happen by a process. Like we are so accustomed to national currencies where we're forced to use them. And so there's a top-down forced adoption that we just can't imagine any other way. And we can't imagine something actually being able to be considered money if it doesn't arrive at a level 10 maturity from day one. And it's just like that is just such a misunderstanding and a flawed understanding of how these things actually work when they're not a top-down process, when it's a market chosen in an elected adoption process, which is, again, this happened with gold. This actually happened. It's happened with Yapstones or whatever it is. Like people chose things to serve as money because of the characteristics that they possessed. And the more people that understood, oh yeah, this is a desirable characteristic for money to have. Yeah, I want to hold that too. Like it's a natural process that happens. And so the same situation here. Like people want to object to Bitcoin because it's not everything that it could be someday. And it's just like that's just a silly objection. Like that's,
And it also
you
just
know,
ignores the logic of it. Like,
yeah,
imagine like if you think that Bitcoin is going to be adopted, like, oh, I'm predicating my purchase on Bitcoin, the medium exchange versus store value debate, of
yeah,
course. Preding
yep,
and VJ Boyparty, I think,
yep,
put this argument together very well, which is if you think that Bitcoin's adoption is predicated or Bitcoin's value is predicated on a medium exchange, and you're against Bitcoin for being not accepted at a whatever
yeah,
grocery store, well, why would you why would you sell Bitcoin if you expect that it's going to be worth considerably more? Why would you buy coffee with it if you expect that it's going to be
yeah,
considerably more?
yeah,
Like it's just, it doesn't make sense. No. First, you have to establish it as a store of value.
yep,
And once it's established as a store of value, once everybody's storing their value in it, well then, and the volatility comes out, well then, like
yeah,
naturally, it'll make a whole bunch of sense to use it as a medium of exchange, right?
yes,
This happens in order. It doesn't happen
yeah.
out of order.
What?
And a lot of the argument with the, with this point is like, no, it has to happen out of order. And you're like, no, what, how?
Yeah. Well, and again, this happens. You can think about this with businesses. You can think about this with anything where it's like, hey, why don't we, hey, I just started up a business. Why don't I go hire 10 people to start my business? And you're like, well, because I don't have I mean, I would burn through my capital in a couple of
Yeah,
weeks,
like a week. Yeah.
and it's like, so wait, so then what do you do? Well, you grow at the size that you're at. And then as you have more resources, you can deploy it. So as you get bigger, as as things get more stable, then you can deploy more resources. But there is a logic and an order to this that we recognize in all kinds of other places. We just don't recognize it when it comes to money for whatever reason. Another one would be like family. Okay. So like I have kids. My kids are, for all in human intensive purposes, other than being really cute, they're worthless for many years. And so
Yeah.
like you could sit there and be like, oh,
Economically
what's the point of
unviable.
having what's the point of having kids, if they're so worthless, for years? Like they limit you in real ways. And you're like, well, yeah, but even in the most craven understanding of this, like they're, yes, but what after this useless period ends, then they're going to become incredibly useful. And so I remember talking, yeah, I know I mentioned it. I remember talking to Robert Breedlove, and he said he has a daughter, and then I at that point had 4 kids, and he's like, dude, I don't know how you do 4 kids. He's like, one is hard, and I'm like, dude, having one is way harder than having 4. I was like, my oldest 2 change diapers. Like it's way more convenient. You're able to, benefit from having multiple kids who grow up and then are able to be productive members of your household, and that actually make your house operate a lot more smoothly and meaningfully. And so again, this is one of these things where you're talking, this is a question of immaturity and not a question of some sort of inherent weakness on Bitcoin's part. This is something that is changing right now. Bitcoin is money now. It's becoming money right now, and it will be money at some day in the future. Like these things can all be true at once.
Yeah. So getting back to the argument in terms of centralization and how that's antithetical to a Christian worldview about how people should participate in a economy, and particularly with money.
Yep.
So regarding mining concentration, yes, it's true that all the miners have, massively become industrial mining farms. However, as we approach the physical limits of semiconductor manufacturing below 3 nanometers, the economic advantages of scale are diminishing. That means, which is to say, like, we can't go any smaller on the ASIC chips, which means that the economies of scale start to come out, which means it's going to be easier and easier and easier for people to decentralize the mining operations themselves. And we already see this happening with the movements like the BitX movement and the, like now just, I saw a tweet on it, but it's just like dozens of other BitX copycat miners that are home miners on your desk. You can just let it run, run on solar power. Just, you are now participating, you're submitting work to the Bitcoin network, and you are participating in the mining process as a distributed, not industrial entity. And that's just going to accelerate. And then the subsidies and the incentives and all the other stuff is going to like start to not make sense because of these systems and the way that the energy will flow through the system, and then the excesses will become less and the subsidies will become less, and like the whole thing will just be way more even and equitable. And then you also get the whole thing where it's like, cool, well, we couldn't afford the huge mining farm, but we can afford the very small mining farm.
Yeah.
And therefore we can now make money for our little village or whatever it is, right? It's incredible. The fact that we hit a wall on the nanometer size chips. Now, maybe there'll be a huge invention that allows us to go even smaller and more efficient, whatever. But I imagine it's going to be the same economic principles start to apply again once that reaches its, peak, like plateau or maturity level. So.
Sure. Shout out to Scott from BitX, the BitX project. I've got one right over there. But yeah, so anyhow, it is an incredible thing. If you don't know about that, go find BitX, BITAXE, and find out what they're doing. They're doing some really cool stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
So then, as for ownership concentration, again, talking about the centralization, the perceived centralization of the Bitcoin network.
Yep.
While Satoshi, MicroStrategy, and ETFs hold significant Bitcoin, they have no special privileges within the network, as we've already established. Unlike traditional financial systems or POS coins, multiple interpretations of what POS stands for, where large shareholders can change rules and profit off of their size, Bitcoin's large shareholders can neither censor transactions nor alter the 21 million coin limit. They are subject to the same consensus rules as someone holding a fraction of a Bitcoin. Additionally, these statistics overlook the millions of smaller holders across the globe who collectively represent the majority of ownership. This is the majority ownership of Bitcoin, which is 40 to 50%, depending on who you consult about it. And it's, obviously it's a little opaque and the rest of it. So 40 to 50% of Bitcoin ownership worldwide is individuals. Right?
Yeah.
Versus the 10 to 15% for the largest owners of any group or exchange.
Yeah.
So again, depending on how you measure it, but that's going to be your ballpark. 40 to 50% is just individuals versus 10 to 15%, which is the extremely centralized groups.
So Bitcoin is far less centralized than the existing financial system.
That's right.
Yeah.
Insanely so.
Yeah.
We're talking like multiple on a step function. This is multiple steps.
Yeah.
The current system, like look at the amount, I wish I had this stat. This would be incredible. Just off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
How much wealth does Elon Musk, one person, have versus like, I don't know, an entire nation full of 100 million people?
Yeah.
Like that's an entire nation.
Yeah.
And like what? Unbelievable.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And again, so this is, and again, as you mentioned, it's getting, I mean, the Bitcoin network is already better and it's just continuing to get more decentralized. So it's only going to get better like from here based on, its adoption and people using it. So it's a system that is getting exponentially better versus the existing financial system, which is getting exponentially worse.
Yeah. And those very same incentives, which have pushed all these individuals to self-custody and hold their own coin, are now pushing all of the inside institutions to do the same because they realize, hey, if all the ETFs all store all of their Bitcoin at the same one exchange and that one exchange gets hacked, every ETF is wrecked.
Yeah.
So they have to distribute that risk. They have to distribute that, which means that they're going to pull out, they're going to start to differentiate themselves. Oh, you should buy our product because we custody our own Bitcoin. We do not, have Coinbase as a risk to us.
Yeah.
And that, we already see it with Saylor and all the other people who are involved with this. They want to move and distribute that centralization of their coin. Sure, they may control the keys, but the inside or the second layer level of distribution continues to distribute. It continues to push for these economies of distribution as opposed to centralization. It's unbelievable, fascinating.
Love it. Yep.
Okay, that brings us to the end of our refutation. So, in summary, though Bitcoin is not without fault, again, it still has problems just like everything else, and can still be used nefariously, just like everything else.
Yep.
It represents a step function of improvement over the legacy fiat system, a step function where the legacy fiat system is literally pointed in the other direction. I mean, call it a step function, I guess, but like we're pointed in the opposite directions for civilization, right?
Yep.
Completely diametrically opposed. So the legacy system systematically prevents billions of people from participating, savings, saving or otherwise gaining access to prudent financial tools, and in many cases forces them to engage in unchristian behavior. And this is, with the welfare cliff thing,
Yeah.
it's not just the welfare cliff. It's the idea that you are, oh, okay, well, if I can't make my rent this month,
Yeah.
well, then I'm going to be homeless, but I do have a boyfriend, right?
Yeah.
And you get into that kind of thing. Well, that's an economic problem that can be solved by unethical behavior.
Yes.
And that when economic problems put pressure on that, it's not saying everybody does that,
Yeah.
but it's to say that that economies put pressure on that behavior.
They tempt. Like
Yeah,
there's a real
right.
a real sense in which these corrupt systems and systems that are designed designed to centralize power in the hands of a very few, like they tempt people to
That's right.
To deviate from the things that God has called us to do because of poverty or because of other types of need. It makes me think of Proverbs 37, chapter 30, verse 7 to 9. It says, God, let's see, I'll find a real translation. Here we go. Two things I've asked of you. Deprive me not before I die. Remove falsehood and lies far from me. Far from me. That's the first thing. Then give me neither poverty nor riches. Feed me with the food allotted to me, lest I be full and deny you and say, who is the Lord? Or lest I be poor and steal and profane the name of my God. Yeah. So you can either deny or profane God, deny him by having so much wealth, this is what happens to central bankers and a lot of the West, is completely become atheistic and denied God because of the wealth that we've afforded ourselves through submitting to a system like this. Or the other side of this is what you're describing, which is I could be poor and steal and profane the name of God. So you can break God's commandments, break his law, because of the poverty that you're in. And so like David is basically saying, keep me from these two situations. Like, let me be somewhere in the middle where I'm not tempted towards either of these two extremes. Help me to be in the middle where I have enough and then I'm grateful for it. I acknowledge you, God, as the source of it. That's the happy medium that we should all be striving for.
Yep. Okay, so this is so extreme, like just the argument that we've laid out here, that it calls into question a Christian response. Okay. Given the above, the proper ethical and Christian thing to do is to engage with Bitcoin, not necessarily because it's perfect, but because it's so much better. Learn it, help others, and participate in its ascension as a global monetary good. It's not going to solve all our problems. The homeless the poor will always be with us, but it pushes in the other direction. It does not push like the poor into more poverty.
Yes.
It pushes the disenfranchised into enfranchisement.
Yes.
Like that's the whole direction that it goes.
Here's
a question. A different direction.
Here's a question for you. What are there other things? I know I'm dropping another question on you, but like, are there other things that you would compare Bitcoin to in this regard?
I mean, like the gospel itself, like if you like any kind of system that essentially like oppresses you, which is an atheist system or a statist system, like it exists for the, like communism, it exists for the ends of itself, like Satan itself. Like the gospel goes in there and just wrecks that, because it says no, there's a higher power that you can have hope in. There's a higher power that gives you agency because it gives you access to the Holy Spirit, which is going to be able to tell you, hey, don't go down that street tonight. Just don't do it. And you're going to be like, whoa, that's weird. You're not going to go down the street tonight. And, maybe there's something there, maybe there wasn't, but like you have now a higher power. You're part of a larger purpose. You have hope about your participation in reality. Yeah. Like that you just can't get otherwise. Right. Yeah. So I'd use that as an answer to the question, but you probably had something else that you're going for.
No, I didn't actually have anything. I just was wondering, but the one does come to mind. If you think about something like slavery, like race-based slavery, you have this, you've designed this system where you've like falsely changed the parameters of who the economic actors are, where you've now defined one people based on the color of their skin as being like, you are now on the object side of the economic transactions. You actually can be transacted with, versus, versus actually and a market actor. And so you see how, you see somebody like the British Empire, like they were one of the first to end slavery, and they did this because they did this. The way that this ended was because you had, among other people, William Wilberforce, who was a politician and strong Christian, who basically went to town over and over over the course of years. Man, I got this fly flying around. Over the course of years, and just basically argued this is unchristian, like this is immoral and wrong. And so, whereas a lot of people are they think like, okay, we can't make Christian arguments to people who aren't Christians, or we can't make these kind of arguments. Like he just is like, yeah, we can actually. And in the United States, there's still tons of Christians for whom this type of argument is incredibly persuasive. And so I think that a lot of Christians are really underestimating, I think that people just underestimate more broadly, like when you frame this as it actually is, as this is a moral issue that is it's immoral, and there's 100 other ways in which it's less efficient and more harmful in a lot of ways, then yeah, I think there is a moral component towards pursuing a system that doesn't share those weaknesses and is healthier and more sustainable and more in agreement with the way God has designed the world to function. And so again, I think it's not just as simple as to say, oh, you should maybe look into Bitcoin. It's like, no, actually the system that you're in is propagating large scale theft, large scale oppression on all kinds of both physical fronts and ideological fronts. And here's Bitcoin that operates completely differently than that. You ought to, and you have to some degree, a moral obligation to seek better ways. And Bitcoin is a better way.
That's right. 100%. Send it. But I think this goes back to how I opened it at the beginning, which is myself personally. I've gone through a stint of being homeless light, of course, and everyone's experience is going to be a little bit different. Yeah. But Bitcoin didn't save me from homelessness. Like it didn't make me unhomeless. Yeah. But what it did was it changed the dynamic. One of the reasons I was homeless was because I basically had no hope in the legacy system. Like I'd studied economics, I'd worked in finance. Yep. I was essentially an insider who understood it, but was like, all of this is BS all the way down.
Yeah.
And how can I, what difference does it make if I get into debt? It doesn't, because it's not real. So just get into as much debt as you want. Like, what difference does it make if I have a job? Because I'm getting paid in something that isn't real. So why have a job? There's layers and layers of just meaninglessness that just goes down and down and down. And Bitcoin essentially changed that for me. It was like, wait a second, this is not this meaningless, atheistic system of men playing God. This is a different system entirely. And that, once you were able to internalize that and figure whoa, this is actually something that's like an economic system that I can have hope for the future in. That's not to say existential hope, by no means.
Yeah.
But it allows you to connect, allows you to put your feet on the ground and start running.
Yes.
Whoa,
yeah.
This is new. This is good. This is God wants us to work. He wants us to participate.
Yeah.
This is the thing that allows that to happen. And so, again, Bitcoin didn't get me out of homelessness. It changed my mind about participating in the system entirely. It's an unbelievable thing.
Yeah. And this is, I get so many conversations or get people pushing back because people will use, now again, there are people who use, Max Kaiser's said that Bitcoin is Jesus. He's said a bunch of other things, and there's been other people who've made similar comments, Bitcoin is God, whatever. That doesn't mean there's not a place for saying something like Bitcoin is a savior. Okay. Small s savior. Okay. There are other people in the Old Testament who are referred to as saviors. It's not just this word now is only reserved for Jesus. It's no, that's it's a word. It's a word that, Jesus is obviously he's a category apart as a savior, but like we can still use these words in true and healthy ways to describe what's going on. And so to describe Bitcoin as giving you hope in some sense, like there's nothing
Mhm.
inherently wrong about saying this. Like I know what you're like I know what you're
Yeah.
saying. Obviously you'd agree. There's a verse that talks about the wealthy and basically I think it's in Timothy. It says like tell the wealthy of the present age you know, not to put their hope in volatile riches, but in that which, you know, but in God who provides us all
Mhm.
things richly to enjoy. It's something to that to that degree. And so there is a sense in which money does give you hope. Like it provides help for you in a limited and sense that's it's easy to trust in it to an unhealthy and unwarranted degree. But it still is true to say to talk
Yeah.
about these things in
Yeah.
these ways. We don't need to shrink away and be terrified of
Yeah.
using certain words to talk about these things because they're true.
Proverbs, I
They're
mean,
yeah,
the verse you just referenced in Proverbs, I think is perfect in that
yeah,
regard. Because at one end, like that's the reality. If you're
yeah,
homeless, you don't know where your meal's coming from. You
correct.
don't like what do we like the
Yes,
temptation,
yes,
like that could be real.
yep,
And on the other end, it's the same thing. But you like there's the path, and like in the verse, like the path down the middle, that's the
yes,
straight and narrow way. You have to tread that path.
yes,
These are things, and it applies to all sorts of other things as well. I mean, just
yeah,
do people place hope that they have a cell phone? Place hope in their life because they have a cell phone? Well,
yes,
it's certainly better than not having a cell phone because
yeah,
it allows you to communicate with your friends and family
yeah,
and hey, I'm here or I'm there. Or
yeah.
like we're gonna get to, like get to participate in civilization. It's an incredible tool,
Yeah. Well,
right?
here's another example. All right, this is probably a better example. Imagine you're out at sea. Okay, you're driving around in a boat and you see someone and they're like a shark is in the middle of attacking them, and they're like, save me!" And then you
Yeah,
drive up in your boat and you see them and you say, "Hey, you really shouldn't use the word save because that's really referred to. Really,
yeah,
salvation is only from Jesus."
yeah,
You'd be like, "Shut
yeah,
up and save me! Like rescue me!" Like and so
yeah,
like just the idea like this is such a dumb thing that I think Christians fall into with their it's well meaning but it's just so dumb. Like there are actually people who are being chewed up and spit out by the existing financial system, and
yeah,
what they need is an alternative. They need a help. They need a tool that
yeah,
does this,
yep,
and we shouldn't be quibbling about words to no profit, to quote
yeah,
another Bible verse. um,
yeah. And then you also get into like the being able to think about something long term.
yeah,
Like if your money's constantly losing value, like if you don't have access to savings, it's just like, whoa, there's no like in fact, like we could literally just be talking about hope in this regard.
yeah,
I have hope that tomorrow I'll be able to eat,
yeah,
right? Like I have hope that the day after tomorrow, I'll have a car. Like
yeah,
just these really basic things that are like, wait a second, if your financial system is all just crumbling,
yeah,
all of your time preference get shortened. You are now high time preference. You cannot think for the long term. There
yeah,
is no hope,
yes,
right? But if your time preferences are lowering, if your savings are increasing, if your agency
yeah,
is increasing, that's just
yeah,
I can see, I can
yes.
participate. I can like have
There
good, wise choices made on long time frames.
there's a degree to these things, and so like everyone would acknowledge, like all both of us, you would acknowledge, yes, you need to realize that again, you can have your short term hope for tomorrow, and that could all go to you could be dead tomorrow. Like
Yeah,
that's the reality.
correct.
Bitcoin could burn the whole world could burn. Well, not the whole world. That's not going to happen until Jesus comes. But like, there's lots of things that could theoretically happen to you. That yes, 100%. This is fully within the reality of something that can happen. My hands are open. God has, you know, again, He knows things that I don't. But there is a real sense in which we have to be. We can talk about these things in real ways, in limited
Mhm.
ways, say true things in limited ways,
Yeah,
without feeling bad about doing this because again at the end of the day language is a it's a useful tool. It's designed to help us communicate reality and yeah to just object to the words being used just is so
yeah.
dumb. um, well,
Okay,
Bondor,
so
this has been
yeah,
great. Killed it. Do you have
so
anything else? I'm
widow's
sorry, I didn't
might.
want to interrupt you.
I
Do
mean,
it.
yeah, widow's might. I mean, just
Yeah,
this Bitcoin is a tremendous help for the poor. It's
yeah,
tremendous help for the disenfranchised.
yeah,
This is in diametric opposition to our current system, which is not, which is systematically designed, set up, and run to further disenfranchise the
Yeah.
poor.
Dude.
So when it comes to the widow's mite, Bitcoin is a thing that pushes in the correct direction, and it should be pursued by Christians, and and the financial system as it exists today should be called out and should be systematically dismantled by Christians. If we're, at the start of the argument, we laid out all these cases. If we say that we believe these things, and we should say that we believe these things, and
Yep.
these things are good, that means we have responsibility to pursue alternatives.
Yeah.
Again.
And dude, there's so many more things we could talk about. Like we didn't talk about the IMF. We didn't talk about this on like a nation state level where we see like with El Salvador, like, I mean, what them as an impoverished country, like what the radical transformation that's happened in large part because of Bitcoin. Like there's a ton of other things that we could talk about, but again, we've already been going for 2 hours. So, bro, appreciate you a ton. This has been fantastic.
Indeed.
Again, we'll be back next time. Why don't you give us a little sneak peek for the next episode?
So we kind of touched on it in the last bit here. But for the next episode, we're going to be talking about Mammon 2.0. What does the worship of wealth and how does that play into this? Because I see this argument all the time, which is, bro, you don't love Jesus. You love Mammon. You talk about Bitcoin so much that, you know what? You need to repent because you love Mammon. We're going to get into that argument.
So much about Bitcoin because you put so much hope, if you're going to put it like in Bitcoin, you're just a money worshiper. That's certainly an accusation. We need to get Connor in here. Shout out to the homie Connor. He's a good dude. Didn't agree with that characterization, but maybe not next time, but we should get him in here at some point. That'd be fun. But Bondor, appreciate you, bro. We'll definitely be back. This won't be the last, Lord willing. Maybe it will. If it is, like, Lord,
maybe Jesus comes back.
Yeah, exactly. If he does, then great. We won't be here next week. This will be the last episode. But if not, then we're happy to be back here. You can look forward to other episodes of the TGFB podcast. We've got one. We've got a 4-parter. We learned from some of our friends who shall go unnamed. But actually, it's the Better by Bitcoin crew. You should go subscribe to their podcast. Bondor is a regular contributor, founding member over there. But basically, we have the TGFB version of this. We've got we still haven't named it yet, but when we're temporarily thinking about TGFB and the Island Boys, or Jordan and the Island Boys, because all the other 3 members of this podcast have lived in Hawaii at various points. And then we've got another podcast where we've got my buddy Ashua and I. Ashua works to leverage Bitcoin for the benefit of missionaries and mission organizations around the world. And then we've got 2 of our other friends, Tim and Jim. Tim is a teaching elder in the Presbyterian Church of America, the PCA. And then Jim is an entrepreneur and a deacon in the PCA as well. So we talk about a number of different things. We go kind of more. We're going to go more theological deep dive with Tim and Jim, and then with the Island Boys, we go into just a whole bunch of stuff about fatherhood, a bunch of stuff about like raising kids, and then just a bunch of Bitcoin stuff and how they all interrelate. So we're grateful for you. We'd love to see you over there. If you're watching this on YouTube, go ahead and reach down, like, and subscribe, man. This is one of these things where it's a tremendously helpful way to help our resources get to other people. We're coming up on 1,000 subscribers. Okay. We've taken way too long to get to 1,000 subscribers. But if you want to help us by doing that, that'd be a big help. We're starting to, again, you really need, like, I think around 10,000 to actually, benefit in terms of actually being able to monetize some of this content. But again, we'd love to continue to create resources that are beneficial to you and beneficial to the church more broadly and people more broadly. So please do that. Like, subscribe, share. You can listen to our podcast and subscribe to those things on Apple and Spotify. Those are the most helpful and influential platforms. So if you want to go over there and leave us a 5-star review, if you feel so inclined, that'd be a big help as well. Again, we appreciate you guys. We'll be back on the next episode of the TGFB podcast.